Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UN Trust and Trust Fund's online project management training, and specifically Module 1 on project management requirements. Congratulations, first of all, on receiving a grant from the UN Trust Fund. It is a very competitive process, and we receive over 1,000 applications a year, so we are thoroughly delighted that you have been selected to receive one of our grants. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the Trust Fund, the history and work of the Trust Fund, and tell you about how the UN Trust Fund works with you, the grantees, including this training package. And I will provide a brief overview of the expectations and requirements related to your UN Trust Fund grant. And specifically, I will explain the contents of the legally binding project cooperation agreement that you've all been given to sign, and explain the key terms in that cooperation agreement. Finally, I'll introduce you to the grantee's handbook. So you will have received by now instructions on the overall 10 modular training course, the UN Trust Fund's online project management training. The outline of the training shows that we'll be covering many topics from this one, which is the introduction, right through to final evaluation. So what is this training for? Well, the overall objective of the training that we're giving you is to ensure that each organization has the skilled staff and institutional policies and procedures in place in your organization in order to achieve the terms of the project cooperation agreement, which is mainly to be accountable for the grant and to achieve the expected results as set out in your project document in a safe and ethical way. So what will the training help you do? Well, after the training, we very much hope that you will have the skilled staff in your team, at least those 2 focal points to take the training, who can manage the Trust Fund project well by understanding how to apply the terms and principles of the project cooperation agreement between the organization, yourselves, and us. And you should know by the end of the training what this project cooperation agreement really means for your project operations and financial management. Because as you probably know, many donors have different rules and requirements. So we want to help you demystify, well, what does the UN Trust Fund as a donor require that might be different from other donors? So there's no surprises as we go along. And in general, we hope that the training will help you effectively plan, implement, monitor, and be accountable for the project funded by us in adherence to our rules. And this is all intended to help you and us get the best chance of achieving the project results as set out in the project document, so that all of us are aiming to end violence against women. So whilst this project training may seem quite just technical and focused on activities, we really want to keep focus on our overall goal, which is serving the women and girls and helping to end violence against women. So this training is intended to help you achieve the results set out in your project document. So these are the mandatory sessions, and the order of these may change over the year, and you will be able to take these sessions at your own pace. But there are 10 sessions in our training, which are all designed around sections in the project cooperation agreement. Each module will explain key terms in the agreement you've signed and what this really means for your day-to-day project management. So for example, in today I will explain briefly what parts of your PCA refer to the project document and the results framework, both of which are required by the PCA. We will also share you tips throughout this training on project management overall and the importance of results-based management and learning, so we can all improve the way we work to achieve the vision of ending violence against women and girls. But throughout the training, we want to hear from you. So when we have the live sessions, we'll be here wanting to hear feedback from you. You are the experts and practitioners in the field. Many of you are highly skilled already in project planning, in financial management, in reporting. So we want to hear tips from you, and we will encourage a network of grantees and facilitate conversations between the organizations we fund so that we can share best practice amongst ourselves. So even though you will see that there's these 10 mandatory sessions, please feel confident that you probably know a lot of this information. But for those for whom it may be new, we hope it will be very helpful to train you on the basics of project management. And as well as learning from the trust fund, we hope that you will learn from each other. So these are the 10 sessions that will be covered over the next few months. And by the end of the training, we want you to make sure that you've applied the training in the following way. You must have a final results and resources framework, which is sometimes called the logical framework for your project. So you must have a very clear results chain which sets out what the project aims to achieve, and you should have measurable indicators against each section of the results framework. And we will help you design data collection methods to monitor those indicators. So this training, particularly module 2 and 3, will help you in the results-based planning. Further training will help you dig deeper in how to design data collection methods and tools for application during baseline data collection and ongoing project monitoring. And we may ask to see some of your data collection tools and methods to assess whether you understand how to mitigate ethical or safety risks when monitoring your projects. So that comes to the next point, that this training should help you set up protocols to protect your project staff and beneficiaries from any safety risks, because understandably, given the sensitive nature of the projects we work on, there can be risks to beneficiaries and those change agents we work with, because we are working on such a sensitive topic, which is violence. So we take ethics and safety of the utmost importance. Further training modules will help you understand what the requirements are in regard to baseline data collection and how to set targets for your project. And we will also go into the operations of finance of your project, for which we recommend you invite any operation or financial staff. And these sections of the training are most useful for then completing your reporting to the trust fund, as you are expected to report every 6 months on your project. So these are the main outputs we expect you to be able to achieve after the end of the training. And to support all this training, we have what's called our Grantee Handbook. And this set of 10 sections, which mirror the 10 training modules, provides you with a clear understanding of your responsibilities by writing down in paper for you to read what our rules and requirements are related to the management of the trust fund. This grantee handbook, which we will send to you by email and via a web link, contains basic background and reference information useful to the administration of the grant you have received. It will also provide you with information and tools needed to successfully manage your grant to ensure compliance with our regulations. And while this handbook is mainly focused on requirements of our grant, it also will provide you with best practice and tips. And please do not hesitate to reach out to the Trust Fund if you have any questions or doubts about this handbook. We welcome feedback at all stages, because we want to make these documents and training manuals as useful as possible. So please do refer to the Grantee Handbook. Anyway, going back to who we are. Well, you've received a grant from the trust fund. So who are we? I'm sure many of you know who we are already, but for any staff in your organization who might be new to us, I'm just going to tell you a little of our history. The United Nations Trust Fund in support of actions to eliminate violence against women is also known as the abbreviation the Trust Fund, was established way back in 1996, over 20 years ago. It was established by United Nations General Assembly resolution around the Beijing Platform for Action. And it's a global multilateral grant-making mechanism that supports national efforts to prevent and end violence against women. We're administered or managed by UN Women on behalf of the UN system. And UN Women provides us a strong institutional foundation as well as field support to our operations. So some of you may be put in touch with the UN Women country office in your country. We don't have country offices in every country, but if you are in a country with UN Women presence that may be able to support you, we will let you know. The overall vision of the Trust Fund is to envision a world where women and girls are free from violence through three main areas, or what we call our outcome areas. We want women to have access to essential, safe, and adequate multi-sectoral services that respond to and address violence. We aim to help ensure effective legislation, policies, and accountability systems, and to ensure these are enforced to prevent and end violence. And we also work on prevention, where we're trying to change behaviors, practices, and attitudes that condone violence against women, change these to ensure that all women are protected from violence. And when you were applying for the funds from the Trust Fund, we asked you to indicate which of these main outcome areas your project was responding to. So many of you are working on access to services, on delivery or improved effectiveness of legislation and policies, and a vast majority of you are working on prevention, particularly at the community level. So you all are very similar in that regard. This vision comes from our strategy for 2015 to 2020, and in our strategic plan for the Trust Fund, we have three main areas of work which the Secretariat here in New York leads on. Firstly, we have the bulk of our work is around grant giving. So just as you applied for the grant last year, each year we manage a whole new call for proposals, and we raise resources, and we ask civil society organizations to apply for grants, and we award them. Secondly, we're really trying to do more on generating evidence from our grants. And this training course will open up some sections around evidence and knowledge. And we really want to learn from you on what works in your projects to inform programming. For example, we ask many of our projects to have a final evaluation so we can learn lessons to drive forward improvements in other programming. And our last big area of work is raising money, resource mobilization and advocacy, which we call our global giving pillar. And here you will see a picture of Nicole Kidman, actually a Hollywood actress who is our ambassador for the Trust Fund, and she raises resources for us and promotes the ideal, the vision of the Trust Fund. So that's a little bit about the Trust Fund. And if you want to know more, we have a website, untf.unwomen.org, where you can find out more information. So what about the profile? As I said, we're old. We're over 21 years old now. We've supported over 493 projects in 139 countries or territories, and we've awarded over 129 million. The majority of our projects have been in Africa, 29%. And interestingly, two countries that have received the most grants, just randomly, is Cambodia, and Peru. And I think we have a number of projects in this new batch that are also operating in Cambodia and Peru. So our largest regional footprint is Africa. After that, it's Asia, and then Americas and Caribbean, Europe and Central Asia, and finally Arab states and cross-regional. So you're joining a very large network of current and former grantees. And if you're interested in learning more, you can now watch a video on our website, which tells you all about the history and highlights some of the stories from our grantees. And we're very pleased that you're joining this huge network of dedicated organizations working to end violence against women. A few more facts about us. Well, there were 31 successful applications in 2017 to 2018 out of 1,301 applications. So, as I said, you were one of just a few successful grantees, so well done. Each of our applications are subjected to rigorous appraisal and selection, and you join a network of over 100 active projects. Specifically from 2017 to 18, these grantees are called Cycle 21. Next year, which is 2019, would be called our Cycle 22 grantees, and so on. So how do we work together with you? What can you expect from us, and what do we expect from you? Well, in the Trust Fund Secretariat in New York, you will have a dedicated portfolio manager or focal point who will be your key contact and advisor on all matters to do with the project. And we will let you know separately who that dedicated person is who will be allocated to your project. You will receive this self-paced online training, and through the years, further opportunity for knowledge exchange, coaching, and training. We at the Trust Fund, through your dedicated portfolio manager, will give you regular feedback on your project, but specifically every 6 months when we receive your report, we will give you some programmatic and financial feedback. Please do use this as a network. If you have any questions or would like to know about other organizations working in your country, region, or field, you can ask us and we can put you in touch with the breadth of organizations we work with. We will give you access to the Knowledge Hub of resources, not least the UN Women's dedicated Knowledge Hub on ending violence against women. And through the period of your grant, we will aim to give your organization and project visibility on the results you have achieved through our communications, through events, and through reporting on your project if we get permission from you. So we're always interested in receiving photos and stories from your projects. So what do we expect from you? As grantee partner organization, we require you to identify a dedicated project manager or director who will be the key contact for your grant moving ahead. You must also nominate 2 staff members to participate and pass in this online training. Any changes that you will make to your project management team must be immediately brought to our attention. So if you change the focal point for your project or the director changes, you must let us know immediately. It's critical for you to know that you, your organization, are accountable to funds entrusted to you, and that you must comply with all our financial rules and regulations as set out in the Project Cooperation Agreement. This is a signed legal agreement between you and us. We expect regular reporting every 6 months on your project progress and challenges, and systematic maintenance of all project records, including any partners that you subgrant to. Reports must be submitted to us using standardized templates provided by us via the grants management system, and reporting timelines must be adhered to, and these are set out in the Project Cooperation Agreement. We expect you, your partners, and your staff to be committed to managing risks, protecting the rights of stakeholders and beneficiaries, and to ensure, above all, that we do no harm through our interventions. And finally, from time to time, we will ask you, as I mentioned, for human interest stories, communication materials, and photos so that we can further amplify your and our work. So those are our main expectations. So we'll go into greater detail on this. Throughout this Module 1, I'm referring to the Project Cooperation Agreement, which is the legal agreement you signed to get your grant. And there are a lot of key words in this contract. So I'm going to try and explain them in a bit more depth. The final project document which you submitted, which was your proposal, as part of your grant agreement, is part of this legal agreement, and you are responsible and ultimately accountable for implementing the activities within the given time frame with the requested resources as set out in that project document. The PCA also sets out many principles which are outlined on this slide, which the UN Trust Fund expects you to adhere to. And these principles are around being accountable, proper management of funds, ensuring you adhere to national or local regulations, that your activities are undertaken without discrimination, your organization must be apolitical, not for profit making, and so forth. So do have a look at that project cooperation agreement carefully. Please understand what you've signed up to. So looking in more depth on the project cooperation agreement, this legal agreement sets out the terms between UN Women on behalf of the UN Trust Fund and the grantee organization for project implementation. This and the next few slides illustrates some of the grant requirements set forth. You must review the PCA and ensure you understand it. For example, Part A, PCA sets out the duration of your project, whether it's a 2 or 3 year project, and you must adhere to that project time frame. This is set out in Article 3 of the PCA, which sets out the time frame in which the project is expected to be achieved. It also stipulates the process of requesting a no-cost extension beyond the expiration date. But in this regard, kindly note that UN Trust Fund has a stringent policy on no-cost extensions. We expect all projects to commence upon and be completed by the date set out in the agreement. Please do not assume that you will ever get an extension to the project. All efforts should be made to complete the activities by the date agreed, which is 3 years. During project implementation, though, we know circumstances may sometimes arise that require you to modify your budget or your results, your activities. Article 8 of the PCA states that any budgetary variations exceeding 20% on any one direct project activity line or any other project budget realignment must be consulted with and approved by the Trust Fund in advance. The same restriction applies to any changes to project activities, outputs, and outcomes. So this is to say that you can modify your project in terms of the budget, activities, and results, but you must do so in consultation and approval with the UN Trust Fund. And indeed, for anything that might exceed or change your budget on any particular project activity line by 20%, absolutely needs an email confirming that this has been approved by the Trust Fund. The next article in the PCA talks about suspension and early termination. And this is not to scare you, but just to keep you aware that it is sometimes feasible that the Trust Fund may decide to suspend or terminate a project if you are not achieving the objectives as set out. Of course, you may be overambitious, but we can always adjust and modify the project. But in the worst case scenario, if we see that there are too many delays, you may be subject to suspension or termination. But in any case, always consult with us. We are open communication. So please do speak to us if you think that you're going to be delayed. We do not immediately suspend or terminate a project, but if we find that a project is delayed for years, months and years, then it could be subject to termination. Further articles in the PCA refer to project planning. The PCA has as an annex your approved project document, which originally was your proposal. And Article 1D of the PCA sets out that the project objectives and activities, project work plan, project inputs, project budget, and all other documents agreed are integral parts of your agreement. But we're encompassing this in the terms project document and results and resources framework and annual work plan. So you are expected to use the project document and results and resources framework appropriately to manage your project carefully. You are expected to design, plan, and manage your project well to ensure the best chance of achieving the objectives. Therefore, the first step in your project is to ensure that the results and resources framework and accompanying annual work plans are accurate and can be used as effective tools. So we do give you time from the point of signing the PCA to, if you need to, amend the results framework. So do not be afraid to come and speak to us if you think that you need to change some of the results that you've set out. You cannot change it completely, but if you decide that something is too ambitious, or on the other hand, if you think you can be more ambitious, come and speak to us about amending your results framework. And noting this, once you have a clear plan in place, your results framework, you are expected to monitor it. And this is done through the collection of data and monitoring of your project. And there are articles in the project cooperation agreement which set out the requirements, but briefly, we do expect you to collect data and reflect progress using and reporting through the standardized templates that we send to you on the grants management system. We ask that you report every 6 months on financial and programmatic progress. The report is open every 6 months, and then you have 30 days to complete the report. These reports are very, very important because we cannot release the next tranche of your grant until we get that report. And conditions for requesting next year's advance and subsequent funds is that that report is being completed and it's satisfactory, and that you can show that you've spent 80% of the previous installments. And just as a quick reminder, financial reports should always reflect transactions of a project on a cash basis, not accruals, a cash basis. So those are the basic requirements in the project cooperation agreement on project planning and data collection. You must have a results framework and annual work plans that are carefully used to monitor and report on your project. The reporting timeline differs from project to project, so please refer to the specific reporting timelines set out in your personalized project cooperation agreement. On this slide, we have an example. And as I mentioned, reports are due every 6 months. So in this example, their project was running in the first 6 months from January 2019 to June 2019. The report, though, is due a month after that to give you time to complete the report. So the report was not due until July 2019, so you have a month to look back at the 6 months. Your annual report should then look back on the previous 12 months, so it can be cumulative progress across the complete 12 months. The second is subsequent funding installments to you can only be advanced when we receive the satisfactory reports via the grants management system that shows that 80% of your expenditure of the last installment has been expended. So that's an example, but look at your specific agreement. So moving on from the project results, what about the financial arrangements? Well, the project cooperation agreement sets out some specific requirements. It sets out the maximum amount of funds that will be made available to you, the total grant amount, and this will never be exceeded. We will always disperse funds now in US dollars, and we expect you to confirm receipt of the funds. Please note the rate of exchange at the date of receipt. of the funds and provide the UN Trust Fund with a copy of the corresponding bank statement with that exchange rate, because that will keep applying. The project cooperation sets out your installment schedule, whether that's every year or other variations. When it comes to making adjustments to your budget, as I mentioned before, you can make variations to the budget. We don't oversee every change. If you realize that you're exceeding your budget on one particular project activity line of less than 20% of that budget line, you do not need to come and ask us, for example, for approval. But if you think that you might exceed any specific budget line, project activity line by 20%, you would need approval from us. So if in doubt, come and ask. You are not allowed to exceed your management costs. That's for staff and so on. That's a strict rule. We encourage you to spend your money wisely and to spend as much of your grant as you can, because if you do not spend the grant by the end of the project, you will be asked to return the remainder of the funds. And also, please make sure that you read our budget guidelines carefully. Ensure you understand what expenses can be charged to your project and what not, because we will not allow ineligible expenses to be charged to us. Sound financial management requires excellent record keeping, and I'm sure all of you already have good maintenance of records, but please note the obligations in the PCA. You must keep accurate and up-to-date records and documents of all expenses incurred with the trust fund's funds. For each disbursement that we give you, we will require proper supporting documentation for the previous installment, including original invoices, bills and receipts that are scanned and sent to us. Please note that based on UN Trust Fund policy, you will be required to provide between 5 to 100% of your expenditure to be supported by proof of payment and invoices. So we might in the first 6 months ask you to send all of your invoices, receipts and proofs of payments for 100% of your transactions, as this is a UN Women policy in place to detect and resolve any issues or challenges early on. So this is only to help you avoid any potential poor audits, and this exercise is for validation purposes only. It's separate to any external audits. This is done once in the first 6 months, and then after that, every 6 months, we might ask to see specific invoices and receipts. So please ensure you keep all copies of invoices, receipts, and proof of payment. Keep it on file for your organization, as well as make sure all co-implementing partners who receive part of the grant do the same. It is your responsibility to ensure that your co-implementing partners also understand the requirements and obligations set forth in the PCA. Onwards to operational requirements. So this is coming more closely to the end of the PCA. So I just have a few more requirements to go through. In terms of operations, the PCA sets out some obligations on personnel, procurement and audit. In terms of your personnel, you are obligated as the organization receiving the funds to ensure that your staff meet the highest standards of qualification, technical and professional competence necessary to meet the project objectives. So this is set out in Article 5 of the PCA. We expect your staff to be free from any conflict of interest relative to the project activities, and that your staff are fully responsible for all the service. You as an organization are fully responsible for all services performed by your personnel. So if you said in your project document that you had specific skills and experience to put in place the project, we'll expect you to have them. On procurement, we have particular rules on procurement, and the PCA Article 7 stipulates that you must maintain and complete accurate records of any equipment or supplies purchased, and take periodical physical inventories. You will be required to provide an annual inventory of such equipment purchased under the grant. We may ask for this information at any time, so please do keep records of your any assets or equipment purchased under the grant, noting any specific rules that we have on that. On procurement, the PCA notes that you must ensure to safeguard the principles of the highest quality, economy, and efficiency when making your choices over procurement of goods and services. This practically means that we expect you to procure goods on the basis of a competitive process by looking at different quotations, bids, or proposals for certain goods or supplies that you buy. There are some exceptions for that in terms of very small items that you might buy. We will go into this in much more depth in the financial and operational management modules 4 and 5. So don't worry if you don't understand this. There's going to be a whole training session on procurement. We also ask you, in our first email to you, we asked you to complete a questionnaire on procurement. This will help us to assess your organization's knowledge and capacity on how to do rigorous procurement. So don't worry if this is not clear to you right now. It will become clearer through the training. On audit, we're required to audit requirements. The audit for the UN Trust Fund supported project may be carried out. So UN Women may carry out an audit of your project, and that is why we allocate a small amount to audit in your budget already to cover the cost. So this is not your money to be transferred to your project. This is a budget set aside of 3.5% to pay for a potential audit. You may or may not be audited. It's kind of a risk-based assessment. So if we think that your project has a risk of financial mismanagement, we will recommend you for audit, and this will be paid for from this amount that's allocated in your grant. If you are not audited, or there's a balance that we don't spend all the money, this amount of money will be retained by the UN Trust Fund. It cannot be reallocated. You may be audited more than once during a project lifetime, and we would always give you sufficient notice if you are going to be audited. We will provide you with full instructions if you are identified for audit. Further, articles in the PCA as we come closer to the end of the document are regard to ethics and safety, capacity development, and communications. And this slide 18 is the very last slide of your requirements, you'll be glad to know. And so we're very close to the end of the session. So on ethics and safety, I mentioned earlier that we really hold the principle of do no harm as the highest principle. It's vital that ethical and safety risks throughout your project are identified, monitored, or managed to ensure project activities are delivered in the manner expected, to ensure personnel do not inadvertently or deliberately harm. So you must have strong safeguards in place to manage safety and ethical risks. The PCA speaks about personnel. It says that your staff must refrain from any conduct that would adversely affect on the United Nations. Your personnel should not engage in any activity which is incompatible with the aims and objectives of the UN or the mandate of UN Women. So this is obviously around commitment to gender equality and human rights. And we have a zero tolerance policy on sexual exploitation and abuse. We expect your organization to be committed to the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. You can show this commitment through making sure that you have an internal complaints procedure for any of your staff to report allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse. Your organization must ensure you have proper measures for investigating any allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse without delay, and that you have procedures in place for any disciplinary action that needs to be taken to any staff or project staff that may be accused of sexual exploitation and abuse. If you do not have them in place yet, we expect you to have them in place within the first year. As well as the internal organizational commitment to prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, you must review your project activities and ensure that none of them lead to significant ethical and safety risks that can't be mitigated. For example, on data collection, if you're planning to ask sensitive questions about violence of your beneficiaries, you must have ethical and safety procedures in place. Beneficiaries should always have the right to refuse any questions or right to refuse participation in project activities if they desire. It would be ethically wrong to push anybody into participating in your project or in any data collection activities. As on capacity building, well, that's what we're doing right now. We're doing some training, and we require the trust fund to allocate at least 2 of your staff members within your organization, the focal points, to complete this online training. If you have to replace any of your key staff members, we expect the new focal point to also complete the training. If the training is not completed, then this could be considered a risk to you adhering to the PCA. This training, among other activities, are paid for by a dedicated capacity development budget, which is embedded within the grant. You will have seen that this money was withheld from the first year's installment. This budget can only be used by the UN Trust Fund to pay for any training or capacity building activities. You cannot use it for any activities, and if it is not spent, it will be withheld by the Trust Fund. Lastly, moving on to communications, we have very clear criteria and a whole guidance note on communications. For example, how to use our name and logo on documents. So if you want to use the UN Trust Fund logo on t-shirts, on banners, you just need to come to us for approval, and we can also provide you with the digital materials as needed. So if in doubt, come and ask us about use of our logo. And we do require you to ask for clearance if you want to use or cite us in any media related activities. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the PCA. So we have covered a variety of sections. So I'm going to just whiz through them again now to recap. So I told you about the 10 modular sessions. Today we've covered the introduction. So this section is quite dry. It covered just the details of the project cooperation agreement. But future sessions will become more interactive around how to plan and monitor and manage your project. We covered the grantee handbook. So we recommend you please read the handbook carefully. I told you about the Trust Fund and who we are, so I hope you understand our vision and strategy and where you fit. I explained what you can expect from us in terms of having a dedicated contact point, training and coaching, feedback on your project, and access to other organizations. I also covered the expectations we expect from you, and went through very specifically some of the key requirements of the legally binding project cooperation agreement. So do read it again carefully. We in particular covered the importance of completing your project in the years stated. We set out the fact that if you need to modify your budget for a certain project, there are certain parameters, and you would need to come for approval for some to the UN Trust Fund. We covered the importance of having a very good project plan, including the results and resources framework, and to use this to monitor and report against your project. We told you about the key dates for your 6-monthly reporting and the important point that we cannot give you a second installment of your grant until these reports are done and until 80% of your expenditure is proven to have been delivered. On finances, we covered the basics of that. We set out that it is very important that you maintain very clear and accurate records. Keep all invoices, receipts, documents proving the payments that you have made. This is because you may or may not be audited, and if the auditors come in, they will expect to see your full accounts and paperwork. You are responsible for your personnel and ensuring that they meet the highest standards and qualifications necessary to deliver your project. In particular, staff must take care to do no harm, and we have a zero tolerance policy on any sexual exploitation and abuse reported, alleged against staff, and to take care during your project activities to do no harm to beneficiaries or staff. We will continue with the capacity development training over the next few months. And finally, yes, on communications, you are welcome to use our name and logo and cite us, but do come to us for approval. So that is, as I said, a very quick run through. We recommend you now go back to your offices and read through the PCA, make sure that all team members working on the UN Trust Fund project understand the requirements, especially the project financial and operational staff. Take a look at the grantee handbook, see what you need to do during project startup, and do join us for an active discussion. We have a Facebook page shown here, and we also have a knowledge test after this that you can test whether you remember any of everything that I've said. If you want to test your knowledge, you can go to the survey. So that's the end of this session. We hope you've learned more about us, that you understand the basics of the legally binding contract. If in doubt, come and speak to us. We want to have an active, open and fruitful relationship with you. We are very excited to see how your projects develop, to learn together, all for the good of the women and girls we serve. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at another session soon. Goodbye.